Samuel.
Hello, hello.
No problem. I've got a few questions. I bet you.
Good.
Thank you. Well, let's get going. So, thank you everybody for coming. Welcome to Sephardic U's three-part webinar series on building the Mishkan. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nathaniel Poole, and I'm the founder of Sephardic U. And tonight I'll provide a general background and overview of what it took to build the Mishkan. This past week, as you probably know, we read Parashat Teruma, and this week it's Tetzaveh, which detail the building of the Tabernacle, the Mishkan. I've personally always been fascinated by historic construction and structures, from the pyramids to our own people, their structures. So we decided to produce this webinar series and take you through our interpretation of the instructions provided in the Torah for building the Mishkan. In the next webinar, Mike Nunes, who's with us this evening, he is an architectural draftsman, and he'll be taking all the information from tonight and putting it into a 3D virtual tour that we'll be able to do tomorrow night. So please join us for that. Tonight, I'm sorry, I missed one thing. He'll also provide the CAD drawings to Samuel for the part 3 of this webinar series. Samuel's a construction manager and also a carpenter, and he's going to take those CAD drawings from Michael Nunes and will convert them and build the Mishkan as a miniaturized model made from wood. It's going to be an exciting series, and I'm glad you're all here to join with us. So let me tell you a little bit about Sephardic U. We were established just a couple of years ago in 2020 as a result of COVID. A number of us were stuck in our homes and unable to pray and put on tefillin at our local synagogues. And like the old adage goes, that necessity is the mother of invention. So Sephardic U was born. However, little did I ever expect it would grow to be of service to regular members throughout North and South America, Central America, and the Caribbean, and as far as Indonesia, the Philippines, to India, Germany, Spain, Morocco, and more I'm not thinking of offhand. But we provide events, classes, daily prayer, both Shachrit and Arvit, and webinars just like this for Jews around the world that may sometimes not have any other access to a local Jewish community or those tools. And thanks to the donations and our volunteers, we provide these services absolutely free of charge. So if you'd like to help us continue our growth and outreach, please feel free to visit the link below. I promise that will be the only pitch you'll hear from me tonight. So without further ado, let's get to it. So tonight I'll take you through an introduction of the Mishkan. I'll provide a list of items that were essential, the types of materials they used, the measurements, and then some fun facts. If you haven't done so already, and it looks like most of you have, please do mute your microphones for now. But at the end of the presentation, I'll open it up to questions, answers, and I'm sure it'll end up a great discussion. How did the Mishkan come about? Well, when we left Egypt, we were in the wilderness, in the desert wilderness, and God ordained that the Israelites would build a portable synagogue that would follow them and be the center of their world throughout the wilderness. There were a couple of requirements for making the Mishkan. It had to be very small and light, and yet it had to be very sturdy to endure the rough desert conditions, and the long journey that they were about to embark on. The Mishkan, or Tabernacle, as it's known in English, was very similar to a camp. It was surrounded by walls that you see here in the image below that were covered with linen. On the outside of the Mishkan were the tents of the 12 tribes and their people. Upon entering through the front side here, which is the west side, you would enter and you would basically walk into the sacrifice altar. Past that, beyond it, was the wash basin for the priests, and then past that was the tent of meeting, or the tent of holies. The tent was draped with skins and linen coverings. Inside the structure, it was divided in two equal parts. One was the room, the first room, as soon as you enter, contained the table and the showbread, a candelabra or menorah, and an altar for the incense that they burned. The second room, the most holy of holies, is where the Ark of the Covenant was contained. The cover over the Ark was made of pure gold and adorned with two cherubim, two angels with wings on top. Inside the Ark of the Covenant were the 2 tablets, the 10 Commandments, as well as Aaron's staff and a pot or plate of manna. So we needed a chief artisan, an architect, to build this, and God chose Bezalel of Judah to be the chief artisan. He chose him because he was very devout, but he was also an engineer, a designer, a carver of metals, whether it was stone, wood, and he had the ability and knowledge and the craftsman skill and craftsmanship and skill at embroidering and weaving, but also because he was very inspired to teach others. So he was joined by a number of people with skillful hands and they primarily made the linens, the curtain woven with blue, purple, and red designs and yarn. So we have now the chief artisan, and we go to the process. You need the materials to build the Mishkan. So where did we get the materials? So to begin the process, the Lord told Moses to solicit offerings for the Mishkan, for the tabernacle. That means going out to the population and saying, we need your best of metals and jewelry to build this portable tabernacle. Those willing hearts brought the gold, the silver, and the bronze, jewelry, fabrics, skins, and acacia wood. So much so that Moses had to eventually tell the people to stop bringing the offerings because they were inundated with them. Some women spun yarn and brought beautiful fabrics of linen, as well as goat's hair and other coverings that we'll see later on in here. I mentioned acacia. Acacia was the prominent wood desert tree that would yield the sturdy poles, but the wood was probably a little too small to be made into planks, except for the smaller furniture. Excuse me. So there were 6 main objects in the Mishkan on the sanctuary grounds. The first, and these are no particular order, but the first was the large bronze altar, which happened to be the first thing you walk into when you walk into the Mishkan. The second was a large bronze basin, the laver, which is what the priest used for washing their hands and feet in the courtyard. The next was the golden table. This is inside the tent meeting, the meeting tent. and that golden table held 12 loaves of bread. In that same room, there was a floor-mounted golden candelabra or menorah with 7 lamps, 3 on one side, 3 on the other, and then the center. There was also a gold incense altar. So there were 2 altars in the Mishkan. The first one was at the entrance. That was for sacrifices only. The one inside the tent was the a golden incense altar. And then finally, in the back room, the Holy of Holies was the Ark of the Covenant, which was a small gold chest or box with 2 angels on top of it, as I mentioned before. And that was set in the inner sanctum of the tent behind a veil. So let's drill down into these 6 items here and go deeper in depth, starting with the sacrifice altar. So the large bronze altar, I'll give you some measurements here because Michael is in the background. He's going to take these measurements and he's going to convert them into his CAD drawings to build the 3D Mishkan virtual world that we'll enjoy tomorrow. So the large bronze altar measured 7.5. First of all, let me back up a second. Everything, the primary measurement was, we used 18 inches for it. So in the conversion, I'm going to use what's easiest for today's standards and where we can understand. So there might be a little rounding by an inch or 2. However, the large bronze altar measured 7.5 feet by 7.5 feet. So it was a square and it stood 4.5 feet tall. It was made from an acacia wood frame, and it had horns on each corner, a horn on each corner, and a grate that you see sitting here that was about halfway down and supported on a ledge. Now the outside, as you'll notice here, had the rings with a rod through it, which was used to lift the altar and move it to its new location when that time came. So a lamb was offered every morning and evening in sacrifice on the altar. Thus, there was a continual burnt offering at the door of the tent of meeting. In addition, the altar was also used for peace offerings, purification, sacrifices for sin, and guilt. We'll move on to the next item, which was the large bronze basin. Now, in some of the depictions we've seen, the altar is maybe off to the right and the bronze basin is over to the left. But for the majority of the depictions that we research and study, it looks like the altar was right in the entrance. And as you keep walking towards the tent, the next thing, which would make sense, would be this basin for the priests to wash their hands and feet before entering the holies. So the next item is this bronze basin. It was used for the ceremonial washing, and it was made from women's mirrors. The laver was provided so that Aaron and his sons shall wash their hands and feet as God commanded, and when they go into the tent of meeting or when they come near the altar to minister, they shall wash with water lest they die. They shall wash their hands and wash their feet. Next item. The next item was the table for the showbread. Now, it measured 36 inches long and 18 inches wide, and it was 27 inches tall. So 36 wide, I'm sorry, 36 long, 18 wide, half of that, and then 1.5 times was the height. So the chief artisan, Bezalel, overlaid the table with gold, and it was to be carried on gold-covered poles through the rings, and its function was to display the 12 loaves of bread that represented the 12 tribes. And they were called the bread of presence or the showbread. 12 loaves were baked each Shabbat and laid on the table. And it was the food for the priests. The next one, the candelabra, the menorah. So Bezalel made a lampstand, what they translates as a lampstand. We know it as a menorah or candelabra, to hold 7 lamps, 3 on each side and 1 in the center. And it was fabricated from a single piece of pure gold. It was decorated with flowers and capitals as ends of the stems. The cups for the lamps were almond shaped, as you can see at the top. And the dimensions, though not listed, they were given to Moses. But what we know is it had to be high enough to give light to the sanctuary. And the lights arranged so that they gave light in front of the candelabra, suggesting reflectors of some type. And of course, with the resources that they had, the lamps burned pure olive oil. The next item, the incense altar. So the incense altar was 18 inches by 18 inches wide, and length were the same, so square, but it sat 36 inches high, so 3 feet tall, and then 1.5 by 1.5. And like the other articles, it was outfitted with gold rings and poles to transport it. And special incense was made by the perfumer and burned on it morning and evening. It was important also in the ceremonies on the Day of Atonement, as well as other sacrifice days. Though, remember, nothing was sacrificed on it or burnt like that. It was incense only. Next item, here we are, the most holy object, the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant was a small gold chest or box with 2 angels, 2 cherubim on top of it. It was set in the inner sanctum of the tent behind the veil, so it's at the very far back. And this most holy article was a small gold covered and gold lined box, and it measured 45 inches long, so just under 4 feet, and its width was 27 inches, just a little over 2 feet wide, and it was 27 inches high as well, so a little over 2 feet high. And it had rings at its feet with poles again attached to them so that it could be carried high without being touched. The box was covered with a gold lid and cherubim that face each other. What I forgot to say is their wings were outstretched and covered as to throw shade on the lid. The cover of the ark, this cover with the cherubim, in Hebrew is called kaporet, or the mercy seat, and it's related to a word for atonement, or kippur, as in Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. That day was the most holy day of the year for Israel and the Israelites, and when the high priest went alone into the Holy of Holies to make sacrifice for all Israel and sprinkled blood on the mercy seat. The sins of the people for the whole year were atoned on that day by sacrifice and repentance. In the time, the Ark of the Covenant contained both tablets, the 10 Commandments. It contained a pot of manna, and it also contained Aaron's budding rod. So the rod apparently grew little flowers and some growth out of it. And that's, in a nutshell, the building of the Mishkan. So I've got some interesting facts here because inquiring minds want to know. So one of the things I kept thinking of is, wow, how much gold, how much bronze, how much copper? So I pulled that information up and researched it, pulled it up, and also converted it by today's standards. So it's pretty fascinating. So the first thing you'll see here is the donated gold totaled 29 talents, and 730 shekels. Putting the shekalim aside, just going with the bigger bulk, a talent is equal to 80 pounds. So I had to do the math. So gold, 29 talents times 80 pounds was over 2,300 pounds of gold. Then I multiplied that by ounces. It gave me 37,120 ounces of gold. At today's going rate per ounce, which is $1,833, you know how much gold was used? $68 million worth of gold. It blew me away. So continuing on, the silver, there were 100 talents and 1,775 shekels. And the silver was cast into the bases for the sanctuary and the veil, as well as the hooks and decorations of the pillars. I didn't go into any of this little minutiae or detail for a reason today, because tomorrow when Mike takes over and does the virtual tour, you're going to see some beautiful detail and see his craftsmanship at work. So the final thing was the bronze for the bases of the door of the tabernacle and the gate of the courtyard. The bronze altar and the other items amounted to 70 talents. So 70, almost 2,100 pounds of bronze. Where did they get all this from? That's right, Egypt. So that was part of the requirements, you know. The Pharaoh had to load them up with goods, and that's how they left in a hurry from Egypt. And their generosity, they gave obviously and literally tons of it back for the building of the Mishkan. And that's it for now. I'm going to turn it over for some questions and answers. Please raise your Zoom hand or just post in the chat. I see I've got some already. Okay, slow down. Thank you. Okay, 80 pounds is like 36 kilos. 80 divided by 2.2, correct? 80 divided by 2.2. You're right on, 36.36 kilos, Jonathan. Who else has a question? Go on and unmute if you want to. Michael Nunes, and then I'll come to you, Paulina. Michael Nunes, you have a question?
Sure, Nathaniel. By the way, thank you for the detail in the measurements, so I can, put them to use and begin to create that virtual Mishkan for us for tomorrow.
My pleasure. I'm looking forward to that more than anything. And then Samuel's miniaturization, the replication in his model. So it'll be a lot of fun.
So as I was sketching while you were talking, when you got to the ark, I thought for the cherubims, their faces, do I have their faces facing down towards the ark or towards themselves?
I don't know. That's the honest answer. But I've looked at dozens of interpretations, and I've seen different ways of doing it. Some of them, the cherubim were angels. Some of them were children, or more of a child's face. Some of them looking down, some of them smiling at each other. And then the other difference I noticed, which was very interesting, were the wings. One in particular that I saw really looked like what we saw, the hieroglyphics or the Egyptian look. It's more angular with sharper feathers. There were one or two of those. That made more sense to me than what the majority I was finding. And the reason it made more sense to me is, well, they had just come out of Egypt. And being slaves there and accustomed to the culture, the art, the everything, it would make sense that maybe their craftsmanship took those cues. Okay,
Thank
does
you.
that answer your question?
It does. It does.
There
it
is
does.
no answer.
It
I
does.
wasn't there, so we can only do the best that we can do or interpret.
It does. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question. Paulina, do we know how much the ark weighed? I don't know. But I have something in regard, I'll mention in a little bit. I'll have to look it up here in just a second. But there is a clue in how many, what was used to transport all of this and how many people. So I'll come back to you, Paulina. Israel Rios, why did the altar have horns? I don't know. Does somebody know that answer or why? I mean, they were around sheep, they were around rams, so I'm sure it has some significance. It was part of their daily life, would be my guess.
Okay, so
correct. Okay, Jeff, will this class and the next two classes recording the email? Yes, Jeff, they will be, as well as a video. So don't worry about missing the next two. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
All right, I do have another question, Nathaniel.
Okay, excuse me 1 second, Michael, before you do. There's an answer to Paulina's about the ark. Samuel looked it up, asked the weight, and he found that it weighed 288 to 330 pounds as an approximate weight. It's interesting. Okay. Rob said it's psychology that will leave idolatry in those images. Yeah, that's a good point, Jonathan. Next question. Tuvia, thank you for coming. David Amar, thank you. Isaac, I'm catching up on people I didn't see earlier. Mo, thank you. Biruz Sorudi, love that name. Jacqueline, Jack Ben Ezra.
So Nathaniel, I
Go on,
have to. So in putting the Mishkan together, I just wanted to ask, and this is not a question for you, but for all of us, as we went through your presentation, which was superb. What are the things that could make the Mishkan portable? The details we got, the clues. Well, I heard you talking about staffs and carrying and stuff like that.
Yeah, almost everything that was a box that we saw or that had any substantial weight had rings and rods to hold and to lift up. So there was definitely, those were the utensils used to, hold on 1 second. Those were the tools used to transport. Give me 1 second. I'm going to find where I ran across this and how many people it took. Oh, the chariots. Gosh, I wish I had it bookmarked here. Go on, David Poole. My dad has a question. I'm going to get stumped here. Go on and unmute yourself, Dad.
Yeah, my expert wife has an answer to the horns. It's so that the corners point towards heaven.
Oh, very nice.
And I remember in Morocco, the old synagogues, all the tops of on the roofs of the synagogues, each of the corners had a horn on it.
Yeah, that's right. It's I'm picturing the architecture. You're absolutely right. Well, tell
That's
Mom
it.
Thank you as always, and you too.
Another thing I wanted to add is
No,
that.
okay, you can talk.
All right.
Go ahead.
All right.
the utensils of the Holy of Holies and the Holy were carried only by the descendants of Levi. The most holy was carried by the descendants by the Kohat. Then the Gershonite took care of the coverings. The Merari took care of the heavy things and carried them over the chariots driven by the oxen. As for the Holy Ark, it was carried on the shoulders of the Kohanite. So there was a distinction that was very, very strict and strictly observed.
That's amazing. There was law and order to everything. You know, one of the other things that I learned that I never even realized, and I don't know how many times I've looked at it, but the preciousness of the metals got higher as you went deeper into the ark. So outside the altar, the bronze and the wash basin were made of bronze. Once you entered in, then it was silver. And once you got into the Holy of Holies tent, it was gold. So it makes sense with what my mom said about, the different hierarchies would carry certain tools. So I did find about the transportation. This one's for you, Paulina. 6 carts were used to transport the Mishkan. The princes gave the Mishkan several gifts, including 6 covered ox carts, 1 for every 2 princes. The Gershonites were given 2 wagons and 4 oxen to transport the Mishkan's tent coverings and tapestries. The sanctuary's wall panels, sockets, posts, and other structural components were transported by the Levite families of Merari, using the remaining 4 wagons and 8 oxen. None were given to the Kehat clan, who carried the most sacred objects on their shoulders. I'm one step behind my mom. Okay, so next question. Oh, I've got one. I remember an old Bareta on Megillah 10b. If you could please read it, it's pretty honest. I think you blow your mind. Okay, thank you. Got such smart people. Okay, he wants me to read something in Megillah 10b. Traditional covenant. What exactly do you want me to read? This is it's a long, is there a certain section, or do you want to read it, Jonathan? Measures. The ark crafted by Moses had 10 cubits of empty space on each side. So cubit was, most will agree, it was around 18 inches. So the Bareta, the ark crafted by Moses, had 10 cubits of empty space on each side. And it's written in the description of Solomon's temple, quote, and before the sanctuary, which was 20 cubits in length and 20 cubits in breadth, end quote. The place before the sanctuary is referring to the Holy of Holies. It was 20 by 20 cubits. If there were 10 cubits of span, apparently the ark itself occupied no space. Very interested. Thank you for sharing that, Jonathan. Any other questions, comments? Would you like another interesting fact? We have,
of course,
please.
So I told you about the chief artisan, Bezalel, but there was also somebody else, Aholiab, and they were in charge of the construction. People donated the materials for the Mishkan, and they gave so generously and freely that Moses had to tell them to stop. The actual construction was carried out by a group of motivated and skilled men and women. They were led by two men named Betzalel and Aholiab at God's command. Betzalel came from a prominent family and was related to Moses. Aholiab, on the other hand, came from the most humble of backgrounds, the Dan tribe. But it made no difference because everyone contributed to their best of their abilities. Another one? I have one. So there is a skin that is mentioned more than 15 times. Does anybody know what that is or want to take a stab at it?
Is it dolphin skin?
Very good. So that's one of the theories, is that it was dolphin skin. But we had this internal debate going back and forth. Was it dolphin skin? Somebody else found that it might have been a different animal. It started with a D, but very similar to the manatee.
Dugong.
Say it again.
Dugong?
Yes, it has. The difference between it and a manatee is it has more of a hump nose and droops over a little more. That was the primary difference. And they're 10, 15 feet, so it would have probably just as much skin. It was also an aquatic mammal, so the tachash would have that weatherproofing that was needed. Shins of Tachash translation is unknown. Jack, can you do you mind unmuting and explaining that? He wrote shins of Tachash, the translation.
That should have been skins, not shins.
Sorry, skins.
Okay. Yeah, it's just the translation. There are multiple theories on what that animal could have been, but it's
supposedly
unknown.
Disappeared, right?
Yeah, or at least the translation is lost to history.
I've read the same thing, so very, very interesting. I suggest it might have been during the crossing of Yam Suf. Good theory. Okay, I told you there were two altars, the outer room, the inner chamber. Okay, here's another interesting fact. Does somebody want to take a guess on how long it took to inaugurate the Mishkan? Michael, go.
7 days?
Nope. No looking it up either. It was inaugurated over the course of 12 days. So Moses practiced erecting and dismantling the Mishkan for a week. The tabernacle was then officially inaugurated on the 1st of Nisan, just over a year after the exodus from Egypt. The entire tent was filled with God's presence, as evidenced by a thick cloud that barred everyone from entering, including Moses. The princes of Israel's 12 tribes brought inaugural sacrifices and gifts for 12 days, the first 12 days of the month of Nisan. The tabernacle was not just for its stewards, the Levites, the priests, but for all the Israelites. The Mishkan is kept now. Okay, another question. Do we know where the Mishkan is kept now? Hidden somewhere. I remember hearing the backbone of the sun is in Sfat. So King Solomon built a magnificent permanent home for God on the Temple of Mount outside of Jerusalem at God's command. The Mishkan was no longer required at the time. The relics of the tabernacle were then buried deep beneath the mountain. According to tradition, the Mishkan was never destroyed because it was built with pure intent and is still waiting for God to return to rest there. Now, that said, there was an architectural find in 2013 in Shiloh that they think they uncovered some of these parts, which would make sense because the Mishkan spent a long time in Shiloh. So I think you can Google that article. It's a very interesting article. And actually, you know what? I think we even posted pictures of it here. Give me 1 second, and I'll share a link with you so you can learn more about everything we went through here. Here we go. I'm going to post this in chat.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Take a look at the picture that they took of this discovery. Okay, yep, it's in there. So you can read more about it in there and on our website at this link. I was thinking the same too. Where is everything? That's right, Jeff. Any other questions? If not, let's let me close this. Give me 1 second. And let me thank you all for joining us tonight. It was truly a pleasure. Hold on, I've got one more. Oh, Israel, thank you. It was truly a pleasure. And don't forget to join us tomorrow, same time, same place, when Michael Nunes takes us through his 3D virtual tour of the Mishkan, which he's going to be building throughout the night. So thank you everyone for joining us. Good night. And we hope to see you all tomorrow.
Same place, same time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you,
you,
Michael.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Natalia.
Thank you, Raphael. Thank you, Joseph. Good night, everyone.